So some of you requested that I actually remake the Breach of Peace non-spoiler review and make it a spoiler review. In this particular case, I will actually be giving extremely concrete examples in the book, in the novella, of what I was talking about in the first review. If you haven't watched it, it's completely fine. You don't have to watch it. These two are completely separate because technically what I'll be doing is remake the first one with spoilers. Toward the end, I'll do something that I like to do in this channel, which is actually examine what the author was trying to do. I will have clips of Daniel Green stating what he wanted to achieve with this novella, and then I will examine how well he achieves those, in my opinion. Because you see, a lot of people out there review books just from their perspective, and what I want to do is not be that selfish and try to examine what it is that Daniel was trying to achieve with the novella and go from there and actually know what it is and how well he does those things that he stated. Let's talk about why in the first review I stated that this novella does not glorify police violence. First of all, I will have one by one evidence countering this particular criticism of Daniel's novella. The first criticism is that he is depicting an Orwellian society. This one is the most obvious. Not all police have to be nice. And some police in this world, like the police in Russia, the police in North Korea, they're technically gods because they represent the ultimate authority in the country. And it means if you mess with them, they can just kill you and move on, and it will be shoved under the radar. Case in point. In the end of the novella, we meet the very end, the cover up. This is what it's called. We meet this guy called George or George. I think it's George, right? And George, technically, he's working at this sort of newspaper. It's called the Ministry of Truth. And in that particular place, he works and he has been given a story to publish. In this story is written what happened to the 7th precinct. But George, his brother Michael, his half-brother Michael, has been killed. His brother's murder has been covered up. His brother's murder has been covered up, and he has to pretend and publish the death of his own brother, even though he knows, his brother was killed by the empire. So in this world, if you are killed by the police and the officers, your murder will be shoved under the radar. And there is something called the fist. It's a unit of the police, and they can technically kill you unprovoked. Moving on. So that's the first evidence. This is an Orwellian society. But the second evidence is actually the character arc of Khalid, as well as her husband and everyone else in the 7th precinct. Because you see, everyone in the 7th precinct in the beginning of the story, we see that they are settled for the system. They have accepted this corrupt system. In other words, they don't care to challenge the Almighty. In fact, at some point, I think Danielle states obviously that Khalid was proud to carry out the tasks given to her by the Almighty. In other words, the will of the Almighty to keep the order in favor of this dictator, this God dictator. Now, with that stated, you see everyone in the 7th precinct is like that. Even the captain. And so the character arc of the 7th precinct and Khalid is to notice and to realize that they are in a corrupt system and they have to fight this system, okay? And what ends up happening as the story progresses is that this character, this protagonist called Chapman, he actually forces the 7th precinct to investigate and to attack this place, a warehouse, where the Ministry of Defense is actually keeping something. And we don't know what it is. It has a lot to do with turning the people to monsters. It's some sort of a dark liquid. And it is an experiment ground, basically. It is an experimental ground. And as the story progresses, the protagonists, they are not questioning anything. Khalid, her husband Samuel, the captain in the 7th precinct, none of them are questioning the system. And they are completely happy to be in the system, okay? As the story progresses, Chapman forces the 7th precinct to investigate the warehouse. And then there's a skirmish in the end of the story. And with that skirmish, what ends up happening is that, well, guess what? Now Khalid has come across evidence that points to the contrary of her previous belief, which is the Almighty can do no wrong. Because that was her belief, that the Almighty can do no wrong. Now she sees that the Almighty and his empire, some guys outside, they can do no wrong, basically. Do you understand what I'm talking about, right? You see, like, this is a character arc. not only for Khalid but also for the 7th precinct. And the evidence points this way. And on top of that, after Khalid's husband is murdered by the Anointed, she runs away. She eventually reaches the 7th precinct. And what ends up happening is that her, as well as the captain in the 7th precinct, and also alongside this other badass lady that escorted Khalid to safety, well, they start talking about treason. They finally realize that the system is corrupted. In fact, this is where Khalid has the final progression of her character arc. In fact, I was kind of wrong in my first review saying that Khalid was a flat character. No, she actually has a character arc in this particular story. And you see, she learns and she decides that the empire and the system that was corrupted and that was doing all of this evil is in fact evil, and that she should have not been complicit. And this happens with the captain. He offers Khalid, a getaway ticket, right? He promises to take her to the next city or something like that. He promises to smuggle her away. And with that example, the captain of the 7th precinct has changed. Of course, the Anointed comes and he kills the captain and everyone, and then he takes Khalid, right? And what this character arc points to is, if there is anything that has to do with police brutality and a system that is corrupted, the message of this story, in every single way possible, keeping in trend with the inspirations from the Orwellian society from 1984, is that we should not settle for a corrupt system. Khalid learns this. In fact, I think in the future, in the next novella, what will end up happening is that, because Khalid gets picked up by the Anointed, and she will be experimented upon, and maybe she will survive those experiments, maybe she'll get superpowers, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just speculating, but yeah, maybe she will join the rebellion as some sort of a lady with superpowers. That will be super interesting, okay? But you see, if there is any message relating to the policeman in this particular novella, it's that we must not settle for a corrupted system and we must fight it. Does he do the best job of getting this across? No. I think he should have given Khalid some sort of doubt. He should have written it with more progression, right? So for instance, maybe, Khalid sees a wrongful imprisonment of some particular person, and this, she doesn't agree with this, and she doesn't think this person committed a major crime, but they are still forcibly put in prison, right? And maybe their life gets ruined, maybe the family gets ruined, and this is maybe the first time Khalid has doubt. And then slowly and surely, we needed to have seen a consistent development. Instead, what we saw was flat, boop, jump, and now she's a member of the rebellion, or she wants to join the rebellion. And I see this is the case because, you see, he's young, he hasn't had a lot of experience, and I don't think it would be fair to accuse him of, supporting police brutality. He just doesn't know how to deal with these complex themes, because they require a man who has lived up to 30, 35, 40 years of age, or someone who was raised in a dictatorship, to actually understand the inner workings of the people and how to properly depict an arc where you have the protagonist learn that a system that is corrupt, we must not settle for that system, right? So I think he's young, and I think that might be a major problem, but I don't think he supports police brutality. And everything in the novella, the evidence points against that. In fact, the evidence points to the opposite. So that was the first point in the original non-spoiler review. Now let's talk about grimdark. Is this novella grimdark, yes or no? The answer is no. In fact, it is. If someone compares this novella to grimdark, it would be a laughable comparison. It would really be a laughable comparison, in my opinion, because nothing about this novella is dark. The beginning is not dark, the end is not dark, and then 80% of the novel, 80% of the novella is like an investigation and Chapman convincing the 7th precinct to raid the warehouse. That's 80%. And then the last 20% is them raiding the warehouse, and then the Anointed attacking them and running away, coming back to the 7th precinct, and then the Anointed wiping the 7th precinct out. And that is all the violence and gore that there is in this novella. Come on, I read Prince of Thorns, The Blade itself, the first law books. Come on. Honestly speaking, if someone says this is grimdark, I am convinced deep down from the bottom of my heart that they have never read any grimdark book in their life, because 80% of this novella is peaceful vibing. Okay, it's mystery. It's these characters investigating the murder and what happened, and Clit having her conclusions, Samuel adding to those, and Chapman disrupting everything. That's what it is. 80%, it's that simple. And then I talked about the writing style and that I didn't like it, and why I didn't like the writing style. Well, the reason why is because in a lot of examples, in a lot of points in the novella, you can see that the sentences start the same way, that the sentences have the same structure, and the flow of the words and the sentences, they don't come together to have some sort of a flow. Okay, they have a very clunky sort of grating feeling to them. Added to the reality that Daniel is actually going for a minimalist prose, because it is evident that he's going for minimalist prose. He does not want anything that sort of interferes with the story. I don't know why this is the case. It could be personal choice that he prefers this, or it could be that he doesn't want the prose to take too long because it's a novella. But those are the only two reasons I can give. But combining this minimalist style that doesn't have any life to it with the reality that his sentences don't have variety and structure, it becomes a big factory production feeling. Like, it feels empty without any heart. Okay? About his objectives, he stated that he wanted to have minimalist fantasy.
When I set out for this, the first thing in my head was, I'd really love for the fantasy genre to take almost a back seat for the story, which, that's not highly original. That happens quite a bit. People have fantasy as more of a drop back, minimal fantasy, but I actually really kind of like minimal fantasy. You wouldn't know it from seeing, some of my favorite fantasy books, but like the Lies of Locke Lamora, I would say, is one of my favorites. And that one, the fantastical elements certainly take a back seat to the plot and the character that's going on, and I really enjoyed that, so I kind of wanted to use some inspiration there.
This is actually achieved extraordinarily well. We live in this sort of Victorian setting, in this sort of 1984 pre-industrial, or like during the beginning of the industrial age, and technically speaking, the characters, the wall, the seventh precinct, the almighty, none of it feels like fantasy until the last end, or when they reach the cellar. Right? When they reach the cellar and they find the father of the family that has been murdered. Those are the only two instances that have fantasy elements to them. Other than that, it's really simple. And technically, it might be too minimalist, okay? I expect in the sequel, there will actually be more fantasy in here. However, right now, there's really technically there's no fantasy here. It's very minimal. He has implied that he has two magic systems. I was expecting to see more of the second magic system. I think he calls it the Grohalind, and in the Grohalind, it's much more interesting. It's in fact a very hard magic system. He has this other soft one, and that one makes an appearance toward the end of the story, when the Anointed shows up. But other than that, it's really technically as minimal as fantasy can get. He achieves this too well. In fact, yeah, too well. As I said, yeah, too well. Let's go to the next objective.
But what I want to be doing is add in a lot of horror elements from the classic horror movies that really I'm in love with. The ones that really inspire me and make a deep impact on how I view the horror genre have been movies like Alien, The Shining, really when suspense came to the forefront, that's when I enjoyed horror the most. And then the modern horror from Stephen King as well, with the psychological aspects.
And about the Stephen King influences, as well as the influences from Alien, this is perfect. He does this very well. In fact, the scene in the cellar where they're chasing and trying to find the monster in the cellar, right, which is the father of the family, guess what? In that scene, it feels extremely alien, but on top of that, the way he uses language and the way he writes it and the way he structures it, it feels very much like a Stephen King novel. So yes, he achieves this very well. Initially, I gave this novella a 4 out of 5, but I'm actually going to have to give it a higher ranking. I'm going to have to give it a 4.5 out of 5. And the main reason why is because the more I reflected on the novella, the more I realized Danielle was trying to write a character arc with Clyd and he was trying to write a character arc with Chapman and the Seventh Precinct. He does not do a very good job of it, but in my initial review, I criticized the characters and that they were flat. They were actually not flat, it's just that it wasn't written well. He had a character arc, dude, like, it just wasn't written well. I think it was a week after I finished it, after I published that initial review, that I realized, dude, he was going for a character arc. She does change, but the Seventh Prince also changed. So it's about, you know, not accepting a corrupted system, but that is not executed well. It's difficult to pick it up. In fact, it took a week of the story marinating in my head for me to finally pick it up. But initially, after I finished the story, it didn't feel like there was any depth to the characters. There is depth to the characters. Daniel is just too young to depict this depth. He should have shown a more continual progression where maybe a third way through the novella, we see that Khalid is starting to have questions about the system. But Khalid doesn't have questions about the system until the very end. So I'll actually give him half a star more for the effort. But in fact, I might remove that because it's not a good effort, but I appreciate the effort. I appreciate the effort, and I appreciate that the final moments in the novella have some character depth. I hope that in the future, Danielle can learn that if you want to have a character arc, the character should have, sort of a continual line of learning and seeing errors in their ways or questioning something, starting to question something. And this is very crucial because it means if you don't have a character development for 99% of the novella or novel, and then for the last 1% you just have, whoop, okay, I have changed, sudden change, it's not good, okay? And so I'll give him a 4.5 out of 5 for this one, okay? And that is my new rating for this novella. I hope that you enjoyed this review. Tell me what you think of this novella down in the comments below. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Do you love it? Whatever it is, tell me down in the comments below. I can't wait to hear your opinion. Have a nice day. Bye.